Marrying a plumber is social suicide, Jasmine. My mother hissed those words at me, her face twisted in disgust as she looked at the man I loved. My sister laughed, covering her mouth with a hand weighed down by a flashy diamond ring, asking if my fiancé knew how to unclog a toilet for the guests. My father simply turned his back, writing a check that he said was the price of my dignity. They thought they had won. They thought stripping me of my inheritance and boycotting my wedding would break me. I walked down the aisle alone, with no father to give me away, while they posted photos from a luxury spa day. They did not know that the man they called a dirty laborer was secretly the owner of the city's largest infrastructure empire. And they certainly did not expect that their cruelty would be broadcast to the world when my husband's face appeared on national television during the Super Bowl, while they sat in a house they no longer owned. My name is Jasmine, and at 35 years old, I learned that blood might be thicker than water, but it can also be toxic enough to poison your entire life. Before I tell you how I went from being the family disgrace to the woman who held the deed to their mansion, please hit that like button and subscribe. If you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you the most, let me know your story in the comments below. The nightmare began on a Tuesday evening at Le Monde, the most pretentious French restaurant in Chicago. The air inside smelled of truffle oil and old money. My parents, Patricia and Clarence, sat on the velvet banquette like royalty holding court. Next to them sat my younger sister Ebony and her husband Chad, a man whose smile always looked like he was trying to sell you something you did not need. I sat across from them, my hand resting on the knee of my fiancé, Darius. His hands were clean, scrubbed raw before we came, but I could still feel the roughness of his palms. Hard-working hands. Honest hands. I took a deep breath, the kind that rattles in your chest, and placed our wedding invitation on the table. It was simple, elegant, printed on cream cardstock. My mother, Patricia, stared at it. She did not smile. She did not reach for it with excitement. Instead, she extended her manicured hand and pinched the corner of the envelope between her thumb and forefinger, lifting it as if it were a soiled napkin she had found on the subway floor. She held it away from her body, her nose wrinkling slightly. "Is this a joke, Jasmine?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. I straightened my back. "No, Mother. We set the date. It is next month. We want you there." Patricia dropped the invitation back onto the table. It landed with a soft thud near the untouched bread basket. She looked at Darius for the first time since we arrived, her gaze sweeping over his off-the-rack suit. It was a decent suit, navy blue, fit him well, but to a woman who could spot a missed stitch from across the room, it probably looked like a costume. "So it is true then," she said, turning her eyes back to me. "You are actually going through with this. You are marrying the water boy." "He is a systems specialist, Mother," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "He manages complex infrastructure." "He is a plumber, Jasmine," she cut me off, her voice raising just enough to make the couple at the next table glance over. "Let us call a spade a spade. He fixes toilets. He crawls under sinks. He deals with human waste. And you, a landscape architect with a master's degree, want to bring him into this family? Do you have any idea how that looks?" Darius squeezed my knee under the table. His face remained calm, a mask of stone. He had promised me he would be civil, no matter what they threw at him. I squeezed back, grateful for his strength, but inside, I was burning. "It is honest work, Mrs. Vance," Darius said, his voice deep and steady. "It pays the bills. And I love your daughter." Chad let out a snort of laughter. He swirled his glass of expensive red wine, looking at Darius with pure amusement. Pays the bills, huh? That is cute. But does it pay for the lifestyle Jasmine is used to? Or are you planning to have her clipping coupons while you are out plunging someone's overflow? Ebony giggled, leaning her head on Chad's shoulder. She held up her hand, letting the light catch the oversized diamond on her finger. Oh, stop it, Chad. Be nice. Maybe Darius can give us a discount. We have been meaning to upgrade the master bath in the new estate. Hey, Darius, do you charge extra for weekends, or is that included in the family rate? The disrespect was so casual, so practiced. They tossed insults like confetti. I looked at my father, Clarence. He had been a surgeon for 30 years. He was a man of science, of logic. Surely he saw how cruel this was. Dad, I said, pleading with my eyes, please. My father sighed, taking a slow sip of his water. He set the glass down and looked at me with tired, disappointed eyes. Jasmine, we have standards. Your mother and I have worked our whole lives to build this reputation. We are members of the Jack and Jill board. We host charity galas. When people ask who our son-in-law is, what are we supposed to say? That he cannot come to the gala because he is fixing a leak in the basement? He is a good man, I insisted, my voice trembling. He treats me better than anyone ever has. Good men are a dime a dozen, my mother snapped. Successful men are what matters. Look at your sister. Look at Chad. He manages a hedge fund. He is bringing wealth into the family. You are draining it. You are dragging us down into the mud with you. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. I will not have it, Jasmine. I will not sit at a wedding table next to people who have dirt under their fingernails. I will not have my friends whispering that the Vance's oldest daughter settled for the help. The waiter arrived then, hovering nervously with a bottle of champagne I had ordered to celebrate. Is this a bad time? He asked softly. Take it away, my mother commanded without looking at him. We have nothing to celebrate. The waiter scurried off. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I felt tears pricking my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give them that satisfaction. Darius cleared his throat. With all due respect, he said, looking my father in the eye, I may not have your pedigree, sir, but I can take care of Jasmine. She will never want for anything. Chad laughed again, louder this time. Buddy, you probably make in a year what I make in a bonus check. Do not embarrass yourself. My father reached into his inner jacket pocket. He pulled out a checkbook. The leather was worn, expensive. He opened it, uncapped a gold fountain pen, and began to write. The scratching sound of the nib on the paper was the only sound at our table. He tore the check out and slid it across the white tablecloth. It stopped right in front of my water glass. I looked down. It was made out to me. $500,000. This is your portion of the family trust, my father said, his voice devoid of emotion. It was supposed to be a wedding gift, but I am making it a severance package. I looked from the check to his face. What are you saying? I am saying you have a choice, my father said. You can take this money, walk out of here, and never see this man again. You start over. Find someone suitable, someone we approve of. Or you choose him. And if I choose him, I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs. My mother answered for him. If you choose him, you are cut off, not just from the money, Jasmine, from us. Do not expect us at the wedding. Do not expect holiday invites. Do not expect us to acknowledge you. You will be dead to this family. We will not have our name tarnished by your poor decisions." I looked at the check. $500,000. It was enough to start my own landscape firm. It was safety. It was approval. It was everything I had been trained to want since I was a little girl. Then I looked at Darius. He was not looking at the money. He was looking at me. His eyes were not pleading. They were patient. He was letting me choose. He was willing to walk away if that was what I needed, or stand by me if I stayed. In his silence, I saw more dignity than in all of my family's shouting. I looked at Ebony. She was smirking, tracing the rim of her wine glass, waiting for me to fold. She knew I always folded. I was the peacemaker, the quiet one, the one who desperately wanted Mommy and Daddy to say, "Good job." But looking at them now, seeing the sneer on my mother's face and the cold indifference in my father's eyes, something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was the quiet sound of a tether breaking. I reached out and picked up the check. My mother's eyebrows lifted slightly, a triumphant look crossing her face. She thought she had bought me. She thought everyone had a price. I held the check up so they could all see it. Then, slowly, deliberately, I tore it down the middle. The sound of the ripping paper was louder than a gunshot in that quiet restaurant. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her pearls. My father's jaw dropped. Chad stopped mid-sip. I put the two halves together and tore them again, and again, until the $500,000 was nothing but blue and white confetti on the table. "Keep your money," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "And keep your reputation. If loving a man who works with his hands makes me a disgrace, then I am proud to be one." "Jasmine, don't you dare," my father warned, standing up. "If you walk out that door, there is no coming back." I stood up. Darius stood with me, his presence a warm wall at my back. "I am not the one leaving, Dad," I said. "You left me a long time ago. You just waited until today to make it official." I took Darius's hand. "Come on, baby. Let's go get a burger. The air in here is toxic." We turned and walked away. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. I could hear my mother hissing my name, telling me to come back and apologize. I heard Chad laughing, calling me a fool. But for the first time in 35 years, I didn't care. As we pushed through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the cool Chicago night, I felt a strange lightness. I had just lost my family. I had just lost a fortune. But as Darius wrapped his arm around my waist and pulled me close, kissing the top of my head, I knew I had won something much more valuable. I just didn't know yet that the war had only just begun. And I definitely didn't know that while I was worrying about paying for a wedding venue, the man holding my hand was silently planning a reveal that would bring my family to their knees. But that is getting ahead of myself. First, I had to survive the loneliest walk of my life, down the aisle. The church we chose was not the sprawling limestone cathedral where my parents had been married 35 years ago. It was a small, weathered chapel on the south side of the city, with stained glass windows that had been repaired more times than they had been cleaned, and wooden pews that creaked under the weight of history. It smelled of beeswax and old hymnals, a scent that grounded me even as my world felt like it was spinning off its axis. I stood in the vestibule, the heavy oak doors closed between me and my future. My dress was simple. A silk slip gown I had bought off the rack because my father had frozen my credit cards the day after the dinner at Le Monde. I ran my hands over the fabric, trying to smooth out invisible wrinkles, trying to calm the tremors that started in my fingertips and radiated all the way to my heart. This was the moment every girl dreams of, the moment I had rehearsed in my head 1,000 times since I was a child. In those dreams, my father was always there, looking dapper in a tuxedo, tears in his eyes as he told me I was beautiful. In those dreams, my mother was fussing over my veil, whispering advice about love and patience. I looked at the empty space beside me. There was no tuxedo. There was no fussing. There was just the dust motes dancing in the shaft of light coming through the transom window. I pulled my phone from the hidden pocket of my dress. I knew I should not look. I knew it would only bring pain. But a small, foolish part of me still hoped. Maybe they were just late. Maybe they had a change of heart. Maybe they remembered that I was their daughter and that love was supposed to be unconditional. I unlocked the screen. One new message from Mother. I opened it, my breath hitching in my throat. It was a photo. Not of them in the car rushing to get here. It was a selfie. My mother and Ebony were wearing fluffy white robes, their hair wrapped in towels, holding cucumber slices over their eyes. The caption read simply, "Enjoying a much-needed detox at the spa. Hope you are happy with your little party. Do not expect a gift. We are using that money for facials." I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. They were not just absent. They were celebrating their absence. They were laughing at my pain, scrubbing away the thought of me with expensive exfoliants. I dropped the phone back into my pocket. It felt heavy, like a stone dragging me down. I took a deep breath, trying to keep the tears from spilling over. I would not cry. I would not ruin my makeup for people who chose a mud mask over my wedding day. The organ music began to swell. It was a rich, deep sound that vibrated through the floorboards. It was time. I signaled to the usher to open the doors. As the heavy wood swung outward, the interior of the church was revealed to me, and the sight nearly brought me to my knees. The contrast was so sharp, it looked like a deliberate art installation about class warfare. On the left side, the groom's side, the pews were packed. Shoulder to shoulder, men and women sat in their Sunday best. These were Darius's people. I saw men with necks thick from labor, wearing suits that strained at the shoulders. I saw hands resting on pew backs that were scarred and calloused, hands that knew the value of hard work. There were grandmothers in hats so elaborate they defied gravity, and children trying to sit still in starched collars. The energy coming from that side was warm, boisterous, and full of genuine joy. Then I looked to the right, my side. The first 10 rows were completely empty. The polished wood of the pews gleamed under the lights, a barren wasteland where my family should have been. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins, the society friends my parents had spent decades cultivating. None of them were there. The emptiness was loud. It was a physical blow, a public declaration that I was unloved, unwanted, and unworthy. I could feel the eyes of Darius's guests shifting from the empty pews to me. I could hear the soft rustle of whispers. They were not malicious, but they were confused. Where is her family? Why is she alone? I took a step forward, and my leg trembled so hard I almost stumbled. The aisle looked endless, a mile of red carpet that I had to walk alone, while hundreds of people watched my shame. I cannot do this, I thought. The panic rose in my chest, tight and suffocating. I am going to faint. I am going to turn around and run. Suddenly, a heavy boot stepped onto the floorboard beside me. I looked up, startled. Standing there was a man I had only met twice. Uncle Jeremiah. He was Darius's uncle, a retired steelworker who walked with a severe limp from an accident at the mill 20 years ago. He was wearing a gray suit that was at least a decade old, and his tie was a little crooked. He looked at the empty space beside me, then at the empty pews, and his face hardened. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with a fierce, protective determination. "A bride does not walk alone," he rumbled, his voice gravelly and deep. "Not into this family." He held out his arm. It was bent at the elbow, stiff and formal. I looked at his face. His skin was weathered, etched with deep lines of exhaustion and laughter. His eyes were kind. "May I?" he asked. A sob caught in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I nodded, slipping my hand through his arm. His suit fabric was rough wool, scratchy against my skin, and he smelled of peppermint and Old Spice. It was the best smell in the world. "We walk together, Jasmine," he whispered. "Chin up. You are a queen today. Do not let them see you bleed." We began to walk. Uncle Jeremiah's limp gave our procession a slow, rhythmic cadence. Step, drag, step. It wasn't the graceful glide I had practiced, but it felt solid. It felt real. As we passed the empty pews, I kept my eyes forward. I focused on Darius standing at the altar. He was looking at me, and the expression on his face broke my heart and put it back together all at once. He saw the empty seats. He saw the text message I had undoubtedly received. He saw the humiliation burning my cheeks, and he looked at me like I was the only person in the universe. He looked at me with a pride so intense it filled the cavernous room. When we reached the altar, Uncle Jeremiah patted my hand. "You got a good one, girl," he whispered. Then he kissed my cheek and took his seat in the front row of the groom's side, leaving the front row of the bride's side conspicuously, defiantly empty. I stood before Darius. He took my hands in his. His palms were warm and dry. He ran his thumbs over my knuckles, grounding me. "I am sorry," I mouthed to him, a tear finally escaping. "I am so sorry about my family." He shook his head slightly. "You are my family," he whispered back. The ceremony was short, but every word felt heavy with meaning. The pastor, a man who had known Darius since he was a boy, spoke about resilience. He spoke about how love is not a feeling, but a labor. Then it was time for the vows. We had decided to write our own. I went first, my voice shaking as I promised to love him through poverty and plenty, though my parents believed only the poverty part applied. Then Darius took a breath. He looked deep into my eyes, ignoring the crowd, ignoring the empty seats. "Jasmine," he began, his voice echoing in the quiet church. "I do not have a fancy pedigree. I cannot give you a title, and I cannot give you the approval of people who measure worth in bank accounts. I work with pipes and concrete. I work with the things people bury underground and forget about." He paused, squeezing my hands tighter. "But I know something about building. I know that a house is only as strong as what lies beneath it. Your family offered you a mansion built on sand, pretty to look at, but ready to collapse at the first sign of rain. I am offering you something else. I vow to be your bedrock. I vow to build a foundation for us that no storm, no earthquake, and no amount of hate can ever knock down. I will protect you. I will honor you. And I promise you As long as there is breath in my lungs, you will never walk alone again. There was not a dry eye on the left side of the church. Even on the right side, the empty pews seemed to absorb the weight of his promise. I kissed him. It wasn't a polite society wedding peck. It was a kiss of desperation and salvation. I kissed him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to liquid. When we turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, a cheer erupted from Darius's side that shook the rafters. It was loud, raucous, and completely lacking in decorum. It was perfect. We walked back down the aisle, past the ghost town of my past, and into the embrace of my future. Outside, the late afternoon sun was dipping low, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. There was no white limousine waiting for us. There was no vintage Rolls-Royce. Parked at the curb was Darius's work truck. It was a Ford F-150 that had seen better decades. The paint was peeling, revealing patches of rust like old scars. The bed was scratched and dented. Someone, likely his cousins, had tied a string of empty soup cans and soda bottles to the bumper and written, "Just married," in shaving cream on the back window. I stopped and looked at it. My mother would have fainted. Ebony would have live-streamed it as a comedy sketch. Darius looked at me nervously. "The town car I ordered got a flat," he lied. I knew he was lying. He wanted to give me an out. He wanted to see if I was truly ready for this life. I laughed. It was a genuine bubble of laughter that rose from my chest. "It is perfect," I said. I gathered up the skirt of my silk dress and climbed into the passenger seat. The interior smelled of coffee and sawdust. The dashboard was cracked. Darius climbed in the driver's side and cranked the engine. It roared to life with a cough and a sputter, a sound that was aggressively unrefined. As we drove away, the cans rattling loudly behind us, creating a cacophony that echoed through the quiet streets, I saw a black sedan parked across the street. The window was tinted, but I recognized the license plate. It was one of my father's friends. Spies. They were watching, and by tomorrow morning, the story would be circulating through every country club and boardroom in Chicago. Poor Jasmine. She really hit rock bottom. Did you see the truck? She is probably going to be living in a trailer park by Christmas. Let them talk, I thought, as I rested my head on Darius's shoulder. Let them think I have drowned in poverty. Let them gloat. Because little did they know, the man driving this rusted truck had just closed a deal to overhaul the water system for the entire tri-state area. Little did they know that the house we were driving to wasn't a trailer, but a historic estate that Darius had bought through a shell company so my father wouldn't know he was the buyer. They thought this was the end of my story. But as the city skyline faded in the rearview mirror, I knew it was just the opening credit. The real show was about to begin, and they were going to have front row seats to their own destruction. 6 months into my marriage, my life was covered in a thick layer of drywall dust. To the outside world, specifically the neighbors who crossed the street to avoid walking past our property, it looked like Darius and I were living in a condemned ruin. The Victorian mansion on the corner of Oak and 4th had been empty for a decade before we signed the deed. It was a sprawling beast of a structure with boarded-up windows, a sagging porch, and a yard that had been reclaimed by aggressive ivy and stubborn weeds. I spent my days in heavy canvas overalls, my hair wrapped in a silk scarf to protect it from the debris, hauling stones and tearing down rotted trellises. My hands, once accustomed to drafting pencils and computer mice, were now rough, stained with soil and mortar, and I loved it. For the first time in my life, I was not just designing a landscape on a screen, I was building it with my own sweat. But to anyone driving by, especially anyone from my former life, it looked like rock bottom. It was a Tuesday afternoon, unseasonably warm for Chicago, and I was on my knees in the front yard. I was carefully laying reclaimed cobblestones for the new winding path that would eventually lead to the rose garden I had designed. I wiped sweat from my forehead with the back of my gloved hand, leaving a streak of dirt across my cheek. That was when I heard the engine. It was not the rumble of a delivery truck or the sputter of a commuter sedan. It was the purr of a high-performance engine. I knew that sound. It was the sound of money. I looked up to see a pearl-white Porsche Cayenne slowing down to a crawl right in front of our gate. The windows were tinted dark, preventing me from seeing inside, but I did not need to see. I knew that car. It belonged to my sister, Ebony. My stomach tightened, a reflex honed by 35 years of her passive-aggressive torment. I considered ducking behind the overgrown hydrangeas, but it was too late. The passenger window slid down with a smooth electric hum. Ebony sat there, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, looking at me with a mixture of horror and delight. Beside her, in the driver's seat, was my mother, Patricia. She was clutching the steering wheel as if she were afraid the poverty of my house might be contagious and jump through the window to infect her leather upholstery. "Oh my God, Jasmine," Ebony called out, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Is that you?" I slowly stood up, brushing the dirt from my knees. I walked toward the gate, keeping my chin high. "Hello, Ebony." "Hi, Mom." My mother did not say hello. She just stared at my dirty overalls, her lips pressed into a thin white line. She looked at the peeling paint on the siding of the house, at the pile of debris Darius had cleared from the foyer that morning, and then back at me. "We heard rumors," Ebony said, leaning her arm out the window. "People said you were living in the old Henderson place, but I told them no way. Jasmine might be desperate, but she is not crazy. This place is a dump. It should be condemned." "It has good bones," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "We are fixing it up." "Fixing it up," Ebony laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Honey, you do not fix up a disaster like this. You bulldoze it. But I guess you cannot afford a bulldozer, can you?" "We are taking our time," I said. "We want to preserve the history." "History," my mother scoffed, finally speaking. "It looks like a crack house, Jasmine. Is this what you left us for? Is this the great love story you threw away your inheritance for? Living in squalor, digging in the dirt like a common laborer." "I am a landscape architect, Mom," I reminded her. "This is what I do." "You used to hire people to do this," she snapped. "Now look at you. You look like the help." I gripped the iron bars of the gate. I wanted to tell them. I wanted to scream the truth so loud it shattered their windows. I wanted to tell them that this wasn't just some rundown shack. This was the historic Galloway Estate, a 5,000 square foot architectural masterpiece that had been off the market for 50 years. I wanted to tell them that underneath the peeling paint was hand-carved mahogany woodwork that was priceless. I wanted to tell them that the stained glass windows we were restoring were made by Tiffany Studios. Most of all, I wanted to tell them that Darius had bought it for cash. No mortgage, no loans. He bought it through a trust so nobody would know, and he put the deed in my name as a wedding gift. We weren't living here because we had to. We were living here because we were meticulously restoring it to be a palace that would make my parents' cookie-cutter mansion look like a dollhouse. But I bit my tongue. Ebony pulled her phone out and snapped a picture of me. I blinked, blinded by the flash. I am just going to post this on the family group chat, she said, tapping away. Everyone has been so worried about you. They need to know you are managing. She looked past me, trying to peer into the dark windows of the house. Is your husband home? She asked, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. He is working, I said. Of course he is, Ebony smirked. Listen, Jazz, I was actually going to call you. Chad and I are having some issues with the plumbing in the guest wing of our new place. Since Darius needs the work, maybe you could send him over. We will pay double his hourly rate. You know, to help you guys out with groceries or soap. She wrinkled her nose as she said it, implying that I smelled. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. It wasn't shame anymore. It was pure, unadulterated rage. They weren't just insulting me. They were insulting the man who was currently inside that house, supervising a team of 12 master craftsmen. I opened my mouth to tell her exactly where she could shove her plumbing offer. I was going to tell her that Darius's company had just signed a contract to overhaul the city's entire water grid, and that he made more in a minute than Chad made in a month. But before I could speak, a warm, heavy hand landed on my shoulder. I jumped slightly and looked back. Darius was there. He had come out of the house quietly. He wasn't wearing his suit today. He was wearing work boots and a dusty t-shirt that clung to his chest. He looked rough, strong, and completely unbothered. He didn't look at the car. He looked at me. Everything okay here, baby? He asked, his voice calm and deep. Ebony's eyes widened a fraction. Even covered in dust, Darius was an imposing figure. Just saying hello to the family, Darius, Ebony called out, recovering her composure. We were just offering you some work. We know things must be tight. Darius finally looked at them. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He looked at them with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a bug under a microscope. We're doing just fine, thank you, Darius said. We have plenty of work to keep us busy. Suit yourself, Ebony said, rolling up the window. Don't come crying to us when the roof caves in on you. My mother refused to look at Darius. Drive, Ebony, she commanded. I have seen enough. The Porsche engine revved, and they peeled away, tires kicking up a cloud of dust that settled over us. I watched them go, my hands shaking at my sides. Why didn't you let me tell them? I demanded, turning to Darius. Why do we have to take that? Did you hear what she said? She offered you charity work. Darius, she treated you like a beggar. Darius smiled, a slow, easy smile that reached his eyes. He reached out and brushed a smudge of dirt from my cheek. Let them talk, Jasmine, he said softly. Let them think we are destitute. Let them think we are broken. But why? I asked, tears of frustration stinging my eyes. It hurts, Darius. It hurts to have them look at me like I am garbage. Because, he said, pulling me into his arms, the louder they laugh now, the quieter they will be when the truth comes out. If we tell them now, they will just be jealous. They will try to tear it down. They will find a way to ruin it. But if we wait, if we let them build their entire reality around the idea that we are failures, then when we finally reveal who we really are, it won't just prove them wrong. It will shatter their world. He kissed my forehead. Silence is a weapon, Jasmine, and we are loading the gun. Come inside. I want to show you what we found behind the plaster in the library. I think it is an original fresco. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of sawdust and his cologne. He was right. He was always right. I nodded and followed him back toward the house. As we walked up the crumbling steps of the porch, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a text from Ebony, maybe the photo she had just taken with a cruel caption. But it wasn't a text. It was an email notification. Subject: Items for sale, Jasmine's room. My heart stopped. I clicked on the link. It took me to an auction site. There, on the screen, were my things. Not just furniture. It was my life. My first drafting table, the one my grandfather had given me before he passed. My award ribbons from high school track. The collection of vintage botany books I had spent years curating. Even the dollhouse I had built from scratch when I was 10 years old. The description read, "Owner moving on, clearing out clutter from old bedroom. All items must go. Cheap prices for quick sale." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the pictures. They weren't just ignoring me. They were erasing me. They were selling my memories to strangers for pennies, not because they needed the money, but because they wanted to scrub my existence from their perfect home. They were treating me like I was already dead. I stopped walking. Darius turned back, seeing the look on my face. "What is it?" he asked. I held up the phone. He looked at the screen, scrolling through the items. His jaw tightened. The calm demeanor cracked just for a second, revealing a flash of cold, hard anger underneath. He didn't say a word. He just took his phone out of his pocket and dialed a number. "Make the call," he said into the phone, his voice low. "Buy it all. Everything on the list. Use the anonymous buyer account. Have it shipped to storage unit B." He hung up and looked at me. "They can sell your things, Jasmine, but they can't sell your soul. And they definitely can't sell your future. We are going to get it all back. And then we are going to take everything else, too." He opened the heavy oak door of our mansion, revealing the grand foyer where sunlight streamed through the dust, illuminating the path to a future they could never touch. I stepped inside, leaving the dust of their judgment on the doormat. The renovation was far from over, but the demolition of my old life was complete. Now, it was time to build. Thanksgiving has always been a weaponized holiday in my family. It was never really about gratitude. It was about performance. It was the annual audit of who was successful, who was failing, and who could afford the most expensive bottle of wine to place on the table. For 34 years, I had played the game, wearing the itchy velvet dresses my mother picked out and smiling until my jaw ached. This year was different. This year, I was coming not as the obedient daughter, but as the outcast wife of a man they despised. I should have stayed home. Darius had suggested we stay at our renovation project, order Chinese food, and eat on the floor in front of the fireplace we had just restored. But I was stubborn. I still had that foolish, childlike hope that maybe, just maybe, the spirit of the holiday would soften their hearts. We spent the morning baking. Darius, with his large, capable hands, had rolled out the dough for a sweet potato pie. It was his grandmother's recipe, rich with spices and molasses, a pie that smelled like home. We placed it in a simple white box, tied it with a ribbon, and drove to my parents' estate in our battered truck. When we pulled into the long, circular driveway, I saw the lineup of luxury cars. There was my father's Mercedes, my mother's Range Rover, and Chad's obnoxious bright red Ferrari parked right in the center, taking up 2 spaces. Our truck looked like a rusted scar against the pristine landscaping. We walked up the front steps, Darius holding the pie box carefully. I rang the bell, the chimes echoing deep inside the house. I straightened my coat, preparing my smile. The door opened, but it wasn't my mother or father. It was Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper who had practically raised me. She looked tired, her eyes darting nervously over my shoulder. "Miss Jasmine," she whispered, not opening the door fully. "Oh, honey, you look beautiful." "Hi, Mrs. Higgins," I said, reaching out to hug her. "We are here for dinner." She didn't open the door wider. Instead, she bit her lip, looking down at her shoes. "Your mother, she gave me strict instructions. She said that if you came, you were to use the service entrance around the back. She said she does not want work boots on the marble foyer." I felt Darius stiffen beside me. I looked down at his boots. They were clean. He had polished them specifically for today. "It is okay, Mrs. Higgins," Darius said gently, his voice calm. "We do not want to get anyone in trouble. We will go around." He took my hand and led me down the steps, past the Ferrari, and around the side of the house towards the garbage cans and the mudroom door. I felt a hot tear of humiliation slide down my cheek. I was the daughter of this house. Yet I was being ushered in through the door they used for the caterers and the pool cleaners. We entered the kitchen. It was chaotic and hot, filled with steam and the smell of roasting turkey. The catering staff was rushing back and forth with silver platters. Through the swinging door, I could hear laughter and the clinking of crystal from the dining room. My mother pushed through the swinging door, holding an empty wineglass. She stopped dead when she saw us standing by the industrial fridge. She was wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, and her hair was sprayed into a helmet of perfection. "So, you decided to show up," she said, her tone devoid of warmth. "And you brought a box." "It is a sweet potato pie, Mom," I said. "Darius made it." She looked at the box with disdain. "Store-bought, I assume. We have a French pastry chef preparing dessert, Jasmine. We do not need your contributions. But I suppose we can leave it on the counter for the staff." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and about seating. We are at capacity in the dining room. Chad brought some very important investors for his new venture, and we simply cannot squeeze in 2 more chairs. You understand. Business comes first." I stared at her. There was a table that seated 20 people in that dining room. I knew for a fact there were only 12 people there. "So where do you want us to sit?" I asked, my voice trembling. "There is a perfectly good table right here," she said, gesturing to the small, round laminate table in the corner of the kitchen, where Mrs. Higgins usually drank her coffee. "You will be more comfortable here anyway. You will not have to worry about using the wrong fork." She turned and marched back into the dining room, the door swinging shut behind her, cutting off the view of the chandelier and the candlelight. Darius set the pie down on the counter. He looked at me, his eyes searching my face. "We can leave, Jas. Say the word." "No," I said, pulling out a metal folding chair. "If they want to treat us like the help, fine. But I am going to eat my turkey. I am not letting them starve me out." We sat in the kitchen, eating off paper plates that Mrs. Higgins apologized profusely for giving us. We could hear every word from the dining room. The conversation was dominated by one voice, Chad. He was holding court, his voice loud and booming, lubricated by expensive scotch. "Gentlemen," he was saying, "the traditional market is dead. Real estate? Too slow. Stocks? for dinosaurs. The future is the blockchain. The future is future coin. I heard my father's voice, eager and desperate. Tell us more about the returns, Chad. You said something about double digits? Double digits? Chad laughed. Clarence, please. That is for amateurs. With the algorithm I have developed, we are seeing monthly returns of 40% minimum. It is a proprietary volatility index that leverages global instability. 40%, my mother gasped. That is incredible. It is guaranteed, Chad said smoothly. But the window is closing. I am only opening this round of funding to family and close associates. I want you guys to be part of this. I want you to retire in style. I am talking private jets, Clarence, not just first class. I saw Darius stop eating. He tilted his head, listening. He put his fork down and wiped his mouth. He stood up. Where are you going? I asked. He didn't answer. He just pushed the swinging door open and walked into the dining room. I scrambled to follow him. The room went silent as we entered. 12 faces turned to look at us. Chad was standing at the head of the table, a projector screen set up behind him showing a graph that went straight up like a rocket. Darius walked over to the sideboard where Chad had spread out some glossy brochures. He picked one up. His eyes scanned the pages rapidly. Excuse us, my father barked, his face turning red. We are in the middle of a meeting. Go back to the kitchen. Darius ignored him. He looked at Chad. This prospectus, Darius said, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. It lists your liquidity provider as a shell company based in the Caymans. And this graph, it shows a linear growth trajectory that is mathematically impossible in a volatile market without a Ponzi structure. Chad's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned, tighter than before. Who let the plumber in? Chad joked, looking at his investors. Sorry, guys, the help is getting confused by the big words. Darius didn't blink. He tossed the brochure back onto the table. I am just reading the fine print, Chad. You are promising 40% monthly returns based on an arbitrage bot. But your disclosure statement says you have total discretion over withdrawal limits. That means once the money goes in, you can lock it there indefinitely. I looked at Darius in shock. I knew he was smart, but I didn't know he understood complex financial derivatives. My mother stood up, slamming her hand on the table. Enough! She pointed a shaking finger at Darius. How dare you? How dare you come into my house, eat my food, and then try to sabotage your brother-in-law? You are jealous. That is what this is. You are jealous because Chad is a genius, and you spend your days with your hands in toilets. Dad, Darius said, turning to my father, do not put your pension in this. Please. I see red flags all over this. The yield spread does not make sense. You are an embarrassment, my father spat, standing up to join my mother. You know nothing about finance. You are a laborer, a blue-collar nobody. Get out of my sight, and take your wife with you. Darius looked at my father for a long moment. He didn't look angry. He looked sad. I am trying to help you, Clarence, Darius said softly. Help us? Chad laughed. You want to help? Go fix the leak in the guest bathroom. That is what you are good for. Leave the thinking to the men in suits. The investors chuckled, swirling their brandy. I felt something break inside me. It wasn't my heart this time. It was the last chain binding me to their approval. Come on, Darius, I said, my voice cold and hard. Let's go. We turned and walked out. We didn't go out the back door. We walked right through the front foyer, our boots clicking loudly on the marble my mother loved so much. As we passed the kitchen on our way out, I looked through the open door. I saw Mrs. Higgins clearing our paper plates, and there, sitting on top of the overflowing trash can, was the white box, the sweet potato pie. They hadn't even opened it. They had thrown it away like garbage, just like they had thrown away Darius's warning. I stopped and looked at it. That pie was made with love. It was made with tradition. And now it was sitting next to coffee grounds and potato peelings. Darius put his hand on my back. "Leave it, Jazz. They don't deserve the sweetness." He opened the front door, and we stepped out into the cold November air. The wind was biting, but it felt clean. Behind us, inside the warm mansion, my parents were currently signing away their entire life savings to a man who would smile as he robbed them blind. I climbed into the truck and watched the house as we drove away. It glowed with golden light, looking like a postcard of the American dream. But I knew the truth. It was a house of cards, and the wind was starting to pick up. Darius reached across the center console and took my hand. His fingers were warm. "I am sorry about the pie," he said. I squeezed his hand. "Do not be. They are going to choke on what Chad is feeding them." We drove home to our dusty, half-finished renovation. We stopped at a gas station and bought turkey sandwiches wrapped in plastic. And as we sat on the floor of our library, surrounded by drop cloths and paint cans, eating gas station turkey, I realized it was the best Thanksgiving dinner I had ever had. Because for the first time, I wasn't hungry for their love anymore. I was full. And I was ready for the war that was coming. 2 months of silence followed that disastrous Thanksgiving dinner. But it was not the quiet kind of silence that brings peace. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a gathering storm. While Darius and I worked tirelessly on restoring our home, stripping away layers of rot to reveal the beauty underneath, my parents were busy doing the exact opposite. They were layering a veneer of exorbitant wealth over a foundation that was rapidly crumbling away. I watched it happen from a distance, like witnessing a car crash in slow motion. It started with the rumors swirling around the country club circuit, whispers that reached me through the few sympathetic acquaintances I had left. They said Clarence and Patricia Vance were back on top. They said my father had made a killing in the crypto market. They said they were spending money as if it had an expiration date. The truth, as I later learned, was far more insidious. It began on a snowy Tuesday evening in my parents' study. Chad had come over with his tablet, his face glowing with the manufactured enthusiasm of a con artist. He sat my parents down and opened the Future Coin app. The interface was sleek, designed to trigger the same dopamine receptors as a slot machine. "Look at this, Clarence," Chad had said, pointing to a graph that defied all laws of economics. My father put on his reading glasses, squinting at the screen. The number displayed in bold green font was staggering. Their initial investment of $2 million, their entire retirement nest egg, was now showing a balance of $4 million. In just 8 weeks, they had supposedly doubled their net worth. "It is beautiful, isn't it?" Chad whispered, leaning back with a satisfied smirk. "And the best part? The market is just warming up. We are projecting another 30% jump by spring." My mother, Patricia, let out a breathless laugh, clutching her pearls. $4 million! Clarence, do you know what this means? It means we were right. It means we are vindicated. It means we can stop worrying about penny pinching, Chad encouraged. Why wait to enjoy your success? The money is there. It is real. Live a little. You deserve it after dealing with all the unpleasantness with Jasmine. That was all the permission they needed. Intoxicated by the phantom numbers on a screen, believing they were untouchables, my parents went on a spending spree that would have made a lottery winner blush. The first purchase was a brand new Jaguar F-Type for my father. He drove it around town with the top down, despite the freezing Chicago winter, desperate to be seen. Next came the remodel of the sunroom, commissioned to a designer who charged $500 just to look at a swatch of fabric. My mother bought a sable fur coat that cost more than my first year of college tuition. They were spending liquid cash they did not have, charging up credit cards and taking out lines of credit, convinced that the digital gold in Chad's app would pay for it all whenever they decided to cash out. They were feasting on a mirage. Meanwhile, the cruelty towards me escalated. Since they felt rich, they felt entitled to punch down. I was sanding the banister in our foyer, my hair covered in sawdust, when my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Instagram. Ebony had tagged me in a post. I wiped my hands on my overalls and opened the app. The photo was of Ebony and my mother. They were sitting in the back of a limousine, holding flutes of champagne. They were draped in designer logos from head to toe, looking at the camera with expressions of haughty superiority. The caption read, simply and brutally, "Thank God I waited for a king instead of settling for a peasant." Some of us were born to wear crowns, and some were born to clean up our trash. Hashtag blessed, hashtag levels, hashtag sorry not sorry. She had tagged me right over the image of a trash can visible on the street corner outside the limo window. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the glass. It was so petty, so childish. But it stung. It stung because I knew exactly what she was doing. She was rewriting history. She was painting me as the failure and herself as the victor, using money that didn't even exist. I felt a shadow fall over me. Darius was standing there, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He looked at my face, then at the phone in my hand. He didn't say anything. He just set the coffee down on the drop cloth and gently took the phone from my fingers. He looked at the photo. He read the caption. His expression didn't change, but his eyes grew dark, like the ocean before a hurricane. "She thinks she is a queen," Darius said quietly, his voice devoid of humor. I sighed, taking the coffee he offered. "Let her have her fun. It is all they have, Darius. Appearances." Darius shook his head slowly. "No, Jazz. It is not all they have. They also have debt, massive amounts of it." He walked over to his laptop, which was sitting on a stack of drywall sheets. It was a high-powered machine, looking out of place in our construction zone. He typed in a password and beckoned me over. I stood behind him, looking at the screen. It was filled with complex spreadsheets and legal documents. "What am I looking at?" I asked. Darius pointed to a row of figures. "This is your parents' mortgage, or rather, their second mortgage. They took it out last week. A bridge loan with a variable interest rate that borders on predatory. They leveraged the house to give Chad more money." My hand flew to my mouth. "Oh my God, they put the house up?" "Everything," Darius said. "And here is the interesting part. The bank that holds the note? They are looking to offload some of their riskier assets before the quarter ends. Your parents' credit score has taken a hit because of the credit card utilization. They are considered high risk." He clicked a button that said Execute Purchase. A loading bar appeared on the screen. "What are you doing?" I whispered, my heart pounding. "I am buying the note," Darius said calmly, "through a shell corporation. As of 10 seconds from now, the bank doesn't own their debt anymore. I do. The screen flashed green. Transaction complete. I stared at him. You own my parents' house? Technically, I own the loan that secures the house, Darius corrected. As long as they make their payments, nothing changes. But the moment they default, the moment that bubble of Chad's bursts and they miss a single payment, I have the right to foreclose. But why? I asked, sinking onto a bucket of primer. Why would you want that headache? Because, Darius said, turning to face me, his face grim. When they fall, and they will fall, Jasmine, I want to be the one holding the safety net, or the gavel, depending on how they treat you. He closed the laptop. Besides, he added, his voice softening, I am tired of them looking down on you. I want them to know that the roof over their heads is provided by the plumber they despise. But we won't tell them yet. We will wait for the perfect moment. That moment came sooner than I expected. A week later, a thick envelope arrived in our mailbox. It was made of heavy, cream-colored cardstock, embossed with gold leaf. It smelled of expensive perfume. I opened it standing on our front porch. Inside was a formal invitation, the Vance family annual Super Bowl party. It was the social event of the season for their circle. It was where business deals were made and status was flaunted. There was a handwritten note at the bottom in my mother's jagged calligraphy script. Jasmine, we decided to be the bigger people and invite you. It is time you saw what real success looks like. Maybe it will inspire you to demand more from your life. Please come. We want you to see the new car. And then the kicker. P.S. Please tell your husband to dress appropriately. We do not want him showing up in protective gear. We have just had the carpets cleaned. I lowered the card, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and adrenaline. They weren't inviting us to make amends. They were inviting us to be props. They wanted an audience for their glory, and who better to witness their triumph than the daughter they considered a failure? I walked into the house, finding Darius in the kitchen. He was on the phone with his publicist, discussing the logistics of the commercial airing during the halftime show. I slammed the invitation down on the marble island we had just installed. We are going, I said. Darius looked at the card, then at me. He raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? I tapped the P.S. note with my finger. They want to see success, I said, my voice steady and cold. They want to see what a real power couple looks like. Fine. Let's show them. Darius read the note about the protective gear. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. No protective gear, he repeated. Got it. I guess I will just have to wear the Tom Ford Custom. He picked up the invitation and tossed it into the recycling bin. Get your hair done, Jasmine, he said. And buy a new dress. Not off the rack. Something custom. Something that says, you own the room. Because by the end of the night, you practically will. The trap was set. They thought they were inviting the sheep to the slaughter, but they had just opened the door to the wolf. And the wolf was wearing a tuxedo. The night of the Super Bowl arrived, draped in the kind of freezing Chicago wind that rattles window panes. But inside my parents' estate, the air was hot with arrogance and expensive cologne. I pulled my car up to the valet stand, ignoring the confused look on the attendant's face when he saw me behind the wheel of a sleek, black sedan instead of the rusted truck he was expecting. I had rented it for the night, a small concession to the role I was playing, but the dress I wore underneath my wool coat was something else entirely. It was a custom piece Darius had commissioned for me weeks ago, back when we first started plotting this reveal. It was a deep emerald velvet that hugged every curve without clinging, structured and fluid all at once. It whispered money. It screamed elegance. And as I stepped through the front doors of the house I grew up in, I felt like a warrior stepping onto a battlefield disguised as a diplomat. The party was in full swing. My mother had outdone herself, or rather, she had outspent herself. The foyer was lined with ice sculptures. Waiters in white tuxedos circulated with trays of caviar and truffle arancini. The noise level was deafening, a cacophony of laughter, clinking glasses, and the booming bass of the pregame show echoing from the massive theater room. I handed my coat to the housekeeper, catching a glimpse of myself in the gilded hallway mirror. I did not look like the downtrodden, disowned daughter they wanted me to be. I looked powerful. I took a deep breath, smoothed the velvet at my hip, and walked into the main salon. The conversation died down in waves as I moved through the room. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. I could hear the whispers trailing in my wake like static electricity. Is that Jasmine? I thought they were broke. Look at that dress. It has to be a knockoff, probably a rental. Or she found it at a consignment shop. I kept my head high, a small, unbothered smile playing on my lips. I spotted my mother near the fireplace, holding court with a group of women from the country club. She was wearing gold lame, looking like a trophy that had been polished too many times. When she saw me, her smile faltered, then fixed itself into a mask of pitying condescension. "Jasmine," she called out, her voice shrill enough to cut through the room. "You made it. And look at you. You really tried." She stepped forward, her eyes scanning my dress with the precision of a barcode scanner. She reached out and touched the fabric of my sleeve, rubbing it between her thumb and fingers, expecting cheap polyester. When she felt the heavy, luxurious silk velvet, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Interesting fabric," she said, pulling her hand back. "Very theatrical. Is this from that little costume shop downtown?" "It is custom, Mother," I said smoothly. Ebony appeared at her side, a glass of champagne in one hand and her phone in the other. She was live streaming, of course. "Custom?" Ebony laughed, aiming her phone camera at my face. "You mean you sewed it yourself from old curtains? Oh my God, you are literally Scarlett O'Hara. That is so cute, Jazz." "Trying to keep up appearances," she turned to her followers on the screen. "Guys, look at my big sister. She is so brave. Showing up here when she is living in a construction zone. That is confidence." I looked directly into the camera lens. "Hello, Ebony. You look expensive." Ebony preened. "Vintage Chanel. Chad bought it for me with yesterday's earnings." "Speaking of Chad, where is your better half? Where's the plumber? Did you leave him outside to park the cars?" The guests nearby chuckled. My father, standing by the bar, let out a loud snort of amusement. "Darius is working," I said, my voice projecting clearly. "He had a very important deadline tonight, a project that the whole country is watching." Ebony rolled her eyes. "A clogged toilet is hardly a national emergency, Jasmine. But fine. Make excuses. We all know he just didn't have a suit that fit." She turned her back on me, dismissing me as if I were the hired help. "Make yourself useful, Jazz. Grab a drink. Try the caviar. I know you probably haven't eaten real food in weeks." I walked over to the bar, my pulse steady. They were so confident, so secure in their superiority. They had built a fortress out of their own delusions, and they had no idea that I was holding the detonator. The first half of the game was a blur. I mingled on the periphery, deflecting insults with vague smiles. I watched Chad strut around the room, slapping backs and talking about yield curves and crypto wallets. He was the king of the castle, high on the fumes of his own fraudulent success. My father hung on his every word, looking at his son-in-law with the pride he had never shown me. Then it was halftime. This was the main event. In America, the Super Bowl halftime show is a cultural touchstone, but the commercial breaks are where the real power is displayed. A 30-second spot cost millions. Only the titans of industry could afford airtime. Everyone gathered in the theater room. The lights were dimmed. The massive 100-inch screen dominated the wall. My parents sat in the front row, flanked by Chad and Ebony, while the rest of the guests filled the leather recliners behind them. I stood in the back, leaning against the doorframe, sipping sparkling water. The halftime performance ended, and the commercials began. There was a beer ad with a talking dog, a car commercial with a famous actor driving through a desert. The room laughed and commented on each one. Then, the screen went black. For a second, people thought the feed had cut out. The room went quiet. Then, a sound emerged. The low, rhythmic rushing of water. It grew louder, powerful, like a river carving through stone. A logo faded onto the screen in sleek, metallic blue letters. Aquaflow Systems. I saw Chad stiffen. He sat up straighter in his chair. He knew that name. It was the company he owed money to. The company building the infrastructure for his fake housing development. The voiceover began. It was a voice I knew better than my own heartbeat. It was deep, resonant, and commanded absolute authority. Civilization is not built on skyscrapers, the voice said. It is not built on stock markets or digital currencies. The screen showed sweeping cinematic drone shots of massive underground tunnels, complex water filtration plants, and steel pipes the size of subway cars being lowered into the earth. It is built on what lies beneath, the voice continued. It is built on the flow of life, water, sanitation, infrastructure. The things you do not see, so that you can live the life you do see. The camera cut to a figure walking through a high-tech control room. The figure was silhouetted at first, wearing a hard hat pointing at a holographic blueprint. Ebony whispered loudly, "Boring. Who cares about pipes? Change the channel." "Hush," my father said, leaning forward. "This production value is incredible." The figure on screen turned. He removed the hard hat. The camera zoomed in. It was Darius. But it was not the Darius they knew. It was not the man in dusty overalls and work boots. He was wearing a charcoal gray Italian suit that fit him like a second skin. His beard was trimmed to perfection. He looked powerful. He looked dangerous. He looked like a king. "I am Darius Vance," he said, looking directly into the camera lens. "Founder and CEO of Aquaflow Systems." The room went deadly silent. I could hear the ice melting in the bucket across the room. The shot changed. Darius was standing on a podium, cutting a ribbon alongside the President of the United States. The President was shaking his hand, patting him on the back. "We are rebuilding America's veins," Darius said, "one city at a time." A chyron appeared at the bottom of the screen. Darius Vance, CEO, Aquaflow Systems. Project valuation, $4.2 billion. The camera pulled back to reveal Darius standing on the roof of a skyscraper overlooking the Chicago skyline. He looked out over the city, then turned back to the camera with a small, knowing smile. "Some people play with money," Darius said, his eyes seeming to lock onto Chad through the screen. "We build the future. The screen faded to black, leaving only the logo and the website. The commercial ended. The game commentary returned, but in the room, time had stopped. No one moved. No one breathed. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the luxurious theater. Ebony's mouth was hanging open, her phone slipping from her hand onto the plush carpet. Chad was pale, a sickly shade of gray washing over his face. He looked like he was going to vomit. He stared at the screen, his mind trying to reconcile the plumber he had mocked with the titan he had just seen shaking hands with the leader of the free world. My father turned slowly in his seat. He looked confused, disoriented, like a man waking up from a coma. That was him, my father stammered. That was the boy, the plumber. My mother, Patricia, was the last to react. She was holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne, her knuckles white as she gripped the stem. She turned her head slowly to look at the back of the room. She looked at me. I was still leaning against the doorframe. I raised my glass of sparkling water in a silent toast. My expression was calm, serene, and absolutely terrifying. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The dirty overalls, the refusal to discuss money, the calm confidence, the trust fund check I had torn up. It all clicked into place. She realized in that split second that she had called a billionaire a peasant. She realized she had thrown her own daughter away for a man who fixed pipes, only to find out he owned the water. Her hand went limp. The crystal flute slipped from her fingers. It hit the Persian rug but didn't break immediately. It bounced once, hitting the hardwood floor exposed at the edge, and shattered. The sound of the breaking glass was the only thing that broke the silence. "Jasmine," my mother whispered, her voice trembling. I pushed off the doorframe, smoothed my velvet dress, and smiled. "Great halftime show, isn't it?" I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I told you he was working on something important." I turned to Chad, whose hands were shaking uncontrollably. "By the way, Chad," I said, "Darius mentioned something about reviewing his vendor contracts tomorrow. I think your development project is on his desk. You might want to check your email." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't wait for the apologies or the screaming or the begging. I simply turned around and walked out of the room, the click of my heels echoing on the floor, leaving the shattered glass and their shattered reality behind me. The game was over. We had just won. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered the usual sounds of clinking ice and polite laughter. Every eye was fixed on me, wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. My mother stood frozen, her hand still hovering in the air where her champagne flute had been seconds before. My father looked as though he had been struck by lightning, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. And Chad, poor, arrogant Chad, looked like a ghost had just walked over his grave. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water, the bubbles dancing on my tongue. I let the silence stretch, stretching it until it became uncomfortable, until it became painful for them. I wanted them to sit in it. I wanted them to feel the weight of their own assumptions crashing down around them. "Oh," I said softly, breaking the spell with a voice that was cheerful and light. "That is the project Darius was talking about. He mentioned he had a shareholder meeting tonight. I suppose that is why he could not make it to the party." I set my glass down on a nearby side table. The coaster was made of marble, cold and hard under my fingers. "Well," I continued, smoothing the front of my velvet dress. "It was lovely seeing you all. The halftime show was entertaining, but I really must be going. I have a feeling my husband will be home soon, and we have a lot to celebrate." I turned my back on them. It was the most satisfying movement of my life. I heard a gasp from the corner, likely from one of my aunts who had spent the last year whispering about how I had thrown my life away. I did not look back. I walked toward the foyer, my heels clicking a steady, confident rhythm on the hardwood floor. "Jasmine, wait!" My father's voice cracked, a desperate, strangled sound. I did not stop. I did not slow down. I walked past the ice sculpture of a swan that was beginning to melt, dripping water onto the expensive tablecloth. I walked past the servers who were staring at me with new respect. I reached the coat check, where Mrs. Higgins was waiting. Her eyes were wide, shining with tears. She had seen the broadcast on the small television in the kitchen. She handed me my coat without a word, but she squeezed my hand tight. I squeezed back, a silent acknowledgement between the only two people in that house who knew the value of loyalty. As I pushed open the heavy front door and stepped out into the biting Chicago wind, the spell inside the house broke. I heard the eruption of voices, a chaotic cacophony of shouting and questions. And then it began. My phone, which I had tucked into my clutch, buzzed. It was a short, sharp vibration. Then another. Then another. By the time I reached the bottom of the front steps, the phone was vibrating so constantly it felt like a living thing trying to escape my purse. I pulled it out, the screen lighting up the darkness of the driveway. Mother, missed call. Mother, missed call. Father, missed call. I watched the names scroll by, a digital waterfall of desperation. The same people who had blocked my number, who had ignored my birthday, who had laughed when I was removed from the family group chat, were now blowing up my phone with a frantic urgency that bordered on mania. Ebony, missed call. Ebony, text message. Jazz, pick up, pick up, pick up. It is an emergency. I let out a laugh, a sharp cloud of vapor in the cold air. An emergency. Yes, I supposed realizing you had alienated the wife of a billionaire was an emergency for people like them. I kept walking. The valet was scrambling to find the keys to my rental car, looking flustered. But I did not need the rental. Rolling slowly up the driveway, parting the sea of luxury sedans and sports cars like a black shark, was a limousine. It was not just any limousine. It was the custom-armored vehicle that Darius used for high-profile security events. It was sleek, menacing, and utterly undeniable. The back window rolled down as it pulled up next to me. "Good evening, Mrs. Vance," the driver said. His name was Marcus, Darius's head of security. He was a mountain of a man who had been with Darius since the beginning. "Hello, Marcus," I said, smiling. "You are right on time." "Darius wanted to make sure you got home safely," Marcus said, stepping out to open the door for me. He thought the rental might be a bit understated for the evening. I handed my keys to the confused valet. "You can keep the sedan," I told him. "Tell my father to pay for the rental." I slid into the back of the limousine. The interior smelled of rich leather and success. It was warm, quiet, and safe. As Marcus closed the door, shutting out the cold and the noise of the party spilling out onto the lawn, I looked down at my phone again. The number of notifications was climbing rapidly. 50, 60, 75. The screen flashed with a photo of Chad. He was calling. I pictured Chad inside that house. I pictured the moment the realization had truly hit him. He was a man who lived on leverage, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, And in his case, Paul was Aquaflow Systems. I knew, because Darius had shown me the files, that Chad's housing development was millions of dollars over budget. He had contracted Aquaflow to lay the sewage and water lines, promising payments upon completion. He had been stalling on the initial deposit, using his charm and family name to buy time. But now he knew. He knew that the CEO of the company holding his debt was the man he had called a toilet cleaner. He knew that the man whose hand he had refused to shake held the power to bankrupt him with a single email. The blood must have drained from his face so fast he probably felt dizzy. He was not calling to apologize. He was calling to beg for his life. I watched Chad's name dance on the screen. Then my aunt called. Then a cousin I had not spoken to in 5 years. Then a woman from the country club who had once asked me if I was the nanny. 100 calls. 110. They were like rats on a sinking ship, scurrying toward the only lifeline they could see. And for the first time in my life, I was not the one reaching out. I was the one holding the rope, and I had absolutely no intention of throwing it to them. 130 missed calls. The phone was hot in my hand. It was a physical manifestation of their panic. Every buzz was a plea. Every vibration was an admission of guilt. I looked at the screen one last time. My mother was calling again. I could imagine her voice, shrill and demanding, trying to gaslight me into believing she had known all along, that she was just testing us, that she loved me so much. I did not answer. I did not send a text. I did not block them. That would have been too emotional. That would have shown them I cared. Instead, I pressed the power button on the side of the phone. I held it down. The screen went dark. The buzzing stopped. The silence in the limousine was profound. It was a clean silence, a peaceful silence. "To the airport, Marcus," I said, leaning back into the soft leather seat. "Airport?" Marcus asked, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. "Yes," I said, a smile spreading across my face. "Darius is waiting on the jet. We are going to Paris for breakfast. I think I have had enough of Chicago for one night." As the car pulled away, gliding smoothly past the gates of my parents' estate, I did not look back at the house. I did not look at the frantic figures running out the front door, waving their arms. I looked forward, into the dark, open road. They could call all they wanted. They could leave voicemails. They could send texts. They could scream into the void. But Jasmine, the girl who craved their approval, the girl who begged for a seat at their table, no longer existed. She had died the moment they laughed at her husband. And the woman who replaced her? She didn't have reception. I closed my eyes and let the motion of the car rock me. The war was far from over. In fact, the financial dismantling of their lives was just beginning. But for tonight, the silence was the greatest victory of all. They were finally listening. But I had nothing left to say. 3 days. That was how long it took for their pride to finally collapse under the weight of their greed. For 3 days, Darius and I had ignored the barrage of calls and texts, living in the blissful quiet of our own success. We went to work, we planned our future, and we let them stew in the realization that the bridge they had burned was the only path to the salvation they desperately needed. I knew they would come. People like my parents and Ebony do not understand the word no. They view boundaries as suggestions and silence as a negotiation tactic. So when the call came from the front desk of Aquaflow headquarters on a Wednesday morning, I was not surprised. I was sitting in my new office, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, reviewing landscape blueprints for the new municipal park project. My intercom buzzed. "Mrs. Vance," the receptionist said, her voice professional but laced with a hint of amusement. "There are 3 individuals in the lobby demanding to see the CEO. They claim to be your parents and sister. They do not have an appointment, and they are refusing to leave." I spun my chair around to look at the city below. I could see the tiny cars moving like ants on the highway. "Let them wait," I said calmly. "But, Mrs. Vance, they are making quite a scene," the receptionist added. "Your mother is threatening to call the mayor." I laughed softly. "Tell them Darius is in a meeting. Tell them they can wait if they like, but he is very busy. And Sarah, do not offer them coffee. Just water. Tap water." I hung up and went back to work. I let them wait. I let them sit on the firm, modern sofas in the lobby for 1 hour. Then 2. Then 3. I checked the security feed on my laptop occasionally. I watched my father pace back and forth, checking his watch, his bluster slowly leaking out like air from a punctured tire. I watched my mother fix her hair in the reflection of the glass turnstiles, her face tight with impatience. I watched Ebony take selfies with the Aquaflow logo on the wall, probably drafting captions about visiting her family's empire. 4 hours. That was how long we made them sit there. 4 hours of being ignored by employees passing by. 4 hours of watching the busy machinery of a billion-dollar company function without them. It was a petty power move, perhaps, but after 35 years of waiting for their approval, 4 hours seemed like a fair trade. Finally, at 2 in the afternoon, I stood up. I smoothed my silk blouse, checked my reflection, and walked to the elevator. It was time. When the elevator doors slid open in the lobby, the sound was like a dinner bell to starving wolves. My mother was the first to spot me. She jumped up from the sofa, her heels clicking frantically on the polished terrazzo floor as she rushed toward me. "Jasmine!" she cried out, her arms wide open. She looked different than she had at the Super Bowl party. Her smile was stretched too wide, her eyes too bright. It was a manic, desperate mask of affection that made my skin crawl. "My baby girl," she gushed, reaching me before I could step out of the elevator bay. She threw her arms around me, pulling me into a hug that smelled of desperation and expensive perfume. I stood stiff as a board, my arms at my sides. "Oh, look at you," she pulled back, holding me by the shoulders, her eyes scanning my face as if looking for a prize code. "You look magnificent, professional, powerful. I always knew you had this in you." I gently but firmly removed her hands from my shoulders and took a step back. "Hello, Mother." Clarence and Ebony were right behind her. My father looked humbled, or at least he was trying to. He held his hat in his hands, offering me a tentative, nervous smile. "Hi, Princess," he said, using a nickname he hadn't called me since I was 6 years old. Ebony pushed past him, looking around the lobby with wide, greedy eyes. "This place is insane, Jazz," she said, not even bothering with a hello. "Do you know how many influencers would kill to do a photo shoot by that fountain? It is giving major tech mogul vibes." I looked at them, really looked at them. For years, these people had been giants to me, their approval the sun I revolved around. Now, standing in the lobby of my husband's building, they looked small. They looked pathetic. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice cool and detached. "You are disrupting business." "Oh, stop being so serious," my mother laughed, a tinkling fake sound. "We are family. We just came to congratulate you. We were so shocked the other night. We didn't get a chance to properly express how proud we are. Proud, I repeated. Yes, proud, she insisted, reaching for my hand again. I sidestepped her. Jasmine, surely you understand why we were so tough on you. We just wanted to make sure Darius was the real deal. We had to test him. A mother has to protect her daughter's future. When we saw that commercial, well, we knew instantly that he passed the test. We were just playing devil's advocate to push you two toward greatness. I stared at her, marveling at the mental gymnastics required to rewrite history so quickly. So calling him a toilet cleaner was a test, I asked. Cutting me out of the will was motivation. Telling me I was a disgrace to the family name was just tough love. My mother waved her hand dismissively. Oh, do not dwell on the past, darling. We were emotional. We were worried. But now we see the truth. You found a king, and that makes you a queen. And us, well, we are just happy to be part of the royal court. Ebony chimed in, stepping closer and flashing her phone screen at me. It was her Instagram profile. Speaking of royal court, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I was thinking, Jazz, now that Darius is like a public figure, he needs brand management. Aquaflow needs a face that appeals to the younger demographic. I have 50,000 followers. I could be the brand ambassador. We could do a whole campaign. Sustainable luxury. I could pose in hard hats, but make it fashion. She looked at me expectantly, as if she had just offered me $1 million idea instead of asking for a handout. You want a job? I stated flatly. I want to collaborate, she corrected, flipping her hair. And Chad is really sorry about the misunderstanding with the contract. He wants to sit down with Darius and restructure the deal. Keep it in the family, you know? I looked at my father. And you, Dad. What do you want? My father shuffled his feet. I just want to make things right, Jasmine. We are family. We should not be fighting. And, well, the car payments are coming up, and with the freeze on Chad's accounts, we thought maybe Darius could help us navigate the banking situation, since he owns the banknotes now. There it was, the truth, buried under layers of fake smiles and bad acting. They weren't here for me. They were here because Darius held the leash to their financial survival, and they were hoping I would tell him to loosen it. I felt a cold, hard laugh bubble up in my chest. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was the laugh of someone who finally sees the joke. You want Darius to help you? I asked. Yes, my mother said eagerly. Just a small meeting, just to clear the air. I looked at them one by one. I seem to recall, I said, my voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged lobby, that 3 days ago, right before you threw me out of your house, you told me I was the shame of this family. You said I settled for a loser. You said you didn't want my husband's dirty work boots on your marble floors. That was the heat of the moment, my mother pleaded. No, Mother, I cut her off. That was the truth. That was how you really feel. You don't love us. You love what you think we can give you. You love the proximity to power. But here's the thing about power. It respects loyalty, and you have none. I took a step forward, forcing them to step back. I am not your gateway to a better life, I said. I am the daughter you threw away. I am the disgrace. Remember? Jasmine, please, my father begged. Go home, I said. We can't, Ebony blurted out. The bank locked the gates this morning. We can't get into the driveway. That sounds like a personal problem, I said. Just then, the private elevator behind the security desk pinged. The heavy doors slid open. Darius stepped out. He was not alone. He was flanked by two men in dark suits who carried briefcases. Darius looked impeccable, his presence filling the lobby instantly. He didn't look at my parents with anger. He looked at them with the calm, efficient detachment of a man dealing with a pest problem. "Darius!" my mother cried out, relief washing over her face. "Thank God. Please, talk to your wife. She is being so unreasonable." Darius walked past the security turnstiles and stood next to me. He didn't look at her. He looked at me. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "I am fine," I said. "They were just leaving." "Actually," Darius said, turning to face them, "I am glad you are here. It saves me the cost of a courier." He snapped his fingers. One of the men in suits stepped forward and opened his briefcase. He pulled out 3 thick manila envelopes. "What is this?" my father asked, his hands trembling as he took the envelope offered to him. Darius adjusted his cufflinks. "That is a formal notice of foreclosure on your estate," Darius said calmly. "Since you have defaulted on the terms of the bridge loan I purchased, I am exercising my right to reclaim the collateral. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." My mother let out a strangled gasp. You can't do that. We are family." The second lawyer handed an envelope to Ebony. "And this," Darius continued, looking at my sister, "is a cease and desist order regarding your use of the Aquaflow name or logo on any of your social media channels. If you mention my company again to your 50,000 followers, I will sue you for defamation and trademark infringement. I do not want my brand associated with your aesthetic." Ebony looked at the envelope as if it were a bomb. "And finally," Darius said, looking around the room, "where is Chad?" "He was too afraid to come," my father whispered, defeated. "Smart man," Darius said. "The third envelope is for him. It is a lawsuit for breach of contract and fraud. My legal team has found evidence that he falsified the geological surveys for his housing development. He didn't just lie to his investors. He lied to the federal government about water safety. He is not just looking at bankruptcy clearance. He is looking at prison time." My mother collapsed onto the lobby sofa, sobbing into her hands. My father stood frozen, holding his foreclosure notice. But we are your parents," my mother wailed. "How can you be so cruel?" Darius took my hand. He interlaced his fingers with mine, his grip warm and solid. "I am not being cruel, Mrs. Vance," Darius said. "I am being a businessman. I am protecting my assets, and my most valuable asset is my wife. You tried to break her. You tried to shame her. Now you are simply facing the consequences of your bad investments." He turned to the security guards who had been standing discreetly by the doors. "Please escort these visitors off the property," Darius commanded, "and ensure they do not return. If they do, call the police for trespassing." Darius didn't wait for them to argue. He didn't wait for them to leave. He turned to me, offering me his arm. "Ready for lunch?" he asked. "I know a great place that serves humble pie." I smiled, taking his arm. "I am starving," I said. We walked back toward the private elevator, leaving my weeping mother, my shell-shocked father, and my terrified sister in the lobby, surrounded by the steel and glass of the empire they would never be part of. As the elevator doors closed, cutting off the sight of their ruin, I felt a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't realized I was carrying for 35 years. The cord was cut. The slate was clean. And for the first time, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was free. The elevator ride to the 50th floor was the longest silence I have ever endured. My parents stood in the back corner of the glass-walled car, huddled together like frightened children, clutching the foreclosure notices Darius had just handed them. They refused to look at the city expanding beneath their feet, perhaps because the higher we went, the smaller they felt. I stood next to Darius, my hand resting in the crook of his arm, feeling the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart. He was the only calm thing in a world that was rapidly spinning out of control. When the door slid open, we were not greeted by a receptionist, but by a corridor of floor-to-ceiling glass that led to the executive boardroom. This was the nerve center of Aquaflow, the place where decisions that shaped the infrastructure of entire states were made. My parents walked hesitantly, their shoes sinking into the plush carpet, their eyes darting around at the modern art on the walls and the sleek, minimalist furniture. They looked out of place, like muddy boots on a white sheet. Darius led us into the main conference room. In the center was a table made of a single slab of black obsidian, long enough to seat 20 people. At the far end, a massive screen displayed the Aquaflow logo. "Sit down," Darius said. It was not a suggestion. My parents sank into the leather chairs on one side. Ebony sat next to them, clutching her purse as if she expected someone to snatch it. Darius and I sat on the opposite side, facing them. The divide between us felt like an ocean. "You asked for help," Darius began, his voice echoing slightly in the large room. "You asked me to fix your banking situation, to intervene with the creditors." My father looked up, a glimmer of pathetic hope in his eyes. "Yes, Darius, please. We made a mistake. If you could just speak to the bank, maybe get us an extension. Chad says the liquidity is coming next week. He says it is just a processing error with the blockchain." Darius looked at my father with an expression that was almost pitying. "There is no processing error, Clarence," Darius said, "and there is no blockchain." He pressed a button on the console built into the table. The massive screen behind him hummed to life. "What you are about to see is the result of a forensic accounting audit I commissioned 3 days ago," Darius explained. "I wanted to know exactly who I was buying debt from." The screen filled with a complex web of transactions, bank routing numbers, and dates. "This is the back end of the FutureCoin app that Chad had you install," Darius said, using a laser pointer to highlight a line of code. "It is not an investment platform. It is a simulator. It is a video game." "A video game?" my mother whispered, her hand trembling as she reached for her throat. "Yes," Darius continued. "The numbers you saw going up every day, they were programmed to rise. It is a simple algorithm designed to trigger dopamine responses. It is the same code used in slot machines. The money you deposited never went into a market. It never bought a single coin." "Then where did it go?" my father asked, his voice barely a squeak. $2 million, Darius. Where is it?" Darius clicked the remote. The screen changed. Now it showed a series of wire transfers. "It went here," Darius said. The list was long and nauseating. "High Rollers Casino, Las Vegas, $300,000. Luxury Motors of Miami, $250,000. Tiffany & Co., $80,000. The Sapphire Club, $150,000. "And who is Sapphire?" Ebony asked, her voice shrill. "Is that a jewelry store?" Darius looked at my sister. "No, Ebony. Sapphire is a person. She is a dancer at a gentleman's club in Nevada, and according to the rental agreement for a penthouse apartment in downtown Chicago, She is also Chad's mistress. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Ebony let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Not because her husband was cheating on her, I realized with a sick feeling, but because the money was gone. My father stood up slowly. He looked at the screen, reading the numbers over and over again. $2 million. 40 years of surgery. 40 years of saving. Gone. Spent on gambling, cars, and another woman. He lied, my father wheezed, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. He told me we were partners. He told me I was a visionary. He told you what you wanted to hear, Clarence, Darius said brutally. He played on your greed. He knew you felt inadequate because you were retired and losing your social standing. He offered you a shortcut back to the top. My father swayed. He reached out to grab the edge of the table, but his hand slipped. He collapsed back into his chair, clutching his chest, gasping for air. "Clarence!" my mother screamed, grabbing his arm. "Breathe! Oh my God, he is having a heart attack!" "He is not having a heart attack," Darius said, checking his watch. "He is having a reality check." Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of the conference room burst open. We all turned. Standing there, panting, sweating, and looking like a cornered animal, was Chad. He was wearing a tracksuit, his hair disheveled, his eyes wild. He must have slipped past the receptionist when the security team was escorting my parents up, or perhaps he had been hiding in the building, desperate to intercept us. "Don't listen to him!" Chad screamed, rushing into the room. He pointed a shaking finger at Darius. "He is lying. He doctored the files. I am on the verge of the biggest deal of the century." "Chad!" Ebony shrieked, standing up. "You bought a condo for a stripper named Sapphire?" Chad froze. He looked from Ebony to the screen, where the evidence of his infidelity and theft was glowing in high definition. "Baby, no, that is a business expense," Chad stammered, sweat pouring down his face. "She is a consultant, a crypto consultant." "You stole my money!" my father roared, finding his voice in the midst of his pain. He struggled to stand up, his face twisted in fury. "You stole everything!" Chad's eyes darted around the room. He saw the foreclosure notices on the table. He saw the cold, hard face of Darius. He saw the end of his road. And then he snapped. With a guttural roar of rage, Chad lunged across the table. He wasn't aiming for my father. He was aiming for Darius. "You did this!" Chad screamed, reaching for Darius's throat. "You ruined me, you jealous, dirty little plumber!" I screamed, but I didn't need to move. Darius didn't even stand up. As Chad scrambled over the sleek black table, displacing paperwork and water pitchers, Marcus, the head of security, stepped out from the shadows of the corner. Whatever happened next happened so fast it was a blur. One moment, Chad was flying through the air, his hands like claws. The next, there was a sickening thud, and Chad was pinned face down on the obsidian table, his arm twisted behind his back at an angle that made me wince. Darius remained seated. He calmly picked up his glass of water and took a sip, looking down at the man squirming and grunting on his conference table. "Let me go!" Chad spat, drool pooling on the expensive black stone. "You can't touch me! I know people!" Darius set his glass down. He leaned forward, bringing his face inches from Chad's sweating ear. "You know, Chad, Darius said, his voice low and terrifyingly calm. You spent the last year making fun of my profession. You called me a plumber as if it were a slur. You mocked the fact that I work with pipes. Darius stood up slowly, towering over the pinned man. But here's the thing about plumbing, Chad. It is essential. It keeps the rot from backing up into the house. It flushes away the filth so that decent people can live in a clean environment. Darius signaled to Marcus. The security guard hauled Chad up by his collar, dragging him off the table but keeping him in a chokehold. Chad hung there, limp and defeated, his tracksuit stained with water. You asked if I know how to handle waste? Darius said, buttoning his suit jacket. Yes, I do. That is my specialty. And you, Chad, you are the definition of toxic waste. Darius looked at the door. Take him out, he said. As if on cue, the double doors opened again. This time, it wasn't family. It was 4 officers from the Chicago Police Department, followed by 2 agents in windbreakers labeled FBI. Chad's knees buckled. Chadwick Montgomery, an agent announced, stepping forward with handcuffs. You are under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. No, Chad whimpered as the metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. No, please. I can fix it. I just need more time. Clarence, tell them. Tell them it was an investment. My father turned his face away, sobbing into his hands. Ebony, however, did not look away. She stared at her husband as he was dragged toward the door. My car! She screamed suddenly, her voice cracking. The Ferrari! Is that gone too? Chad looked back at her, his eyes dead. It was a lease, Ebony. It was all a lease. The police dragged him out. The room fell silent again, save for the sound of my father's weeping and Ebony's hyperventilating breaths. Darius walked over to the console and turned off the screen. The evidence of their ruin faded to black, leaving only our reflections in the dark glass. He turned to my parents. The show is over, Darius said. You have your answers. You know where your money went. And now you know exactly who was looking out for you and who was robbing you blind. He looked at me. Shall we go, Jasmine? I have a meeting with the city council in 20 minutes. Unlike Chad, I actually have work to do. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. I looked at my family one last time. They sat in the ruins of their own making, stripped of their pride, their money, and their illusions. My father was broken. My mother was staring blankly at the wall. Ebony was crying over a leased car. Goodbye, I said softly. I walked out of the room next to my husband, leaving them in the cold glass tower, high above the world they used to think they owned, but which they now realized they couldn't even afford to rent. The door clicked shut behind us, sealing the tomb of their ambitions. And as we walked down the corridor, I realized that the heavy feeling in my chest wasn't guilt. It was the final, settling dust of a demolition well done. The month that followed the arrest of Chad was a slow, agonizing funeral for the Vance family name. While my sister locked herself in a rented room, refusing to show her face to a world that had witnessed her husband's perp walk on the evening news, my parents remained in the mansion, paralyzed by a potent cocktail of denial and illusion. They truly believed that if they just stayed inside, pulled the drapes tight enough, and ignored the ringing doorbell, the reality of their bankruptcy would simply evaporate. But foreclosure does not work that way. It is a machine, cold and efficient, and it does not care about your social standing or how many charity galas you have hosted. On the 30th day, the machine arrived. I parked my car across the street, watching the scene unfold with a strange sense of detachment. It was a gray, overcast morning, the kind of Chicago weather that seeps into your bones. A sheriff's cruiser sat in the driveway, its lights flashing silently against the brick facade of the house. Next to it was a white van marked with the logo of a property management firm. Two men in blue coveralls were already walking up the front steps, carrying heavy rolls of tape and padlocks. I watched as my front door, the door I had been forbidden to walk through just a month prior, was pushed open. My father stepped out onto the porch. He was wearing his silk dressing gown over pajamas, his hair uncombed, looking like a ghost of the man who used to terrorize boardrooms. He was waving a piece of paper at the sheriff, shouting something that was lost in the wind, but I could read his body language. He was indignant. He was offended. He was desperate. The sheriff, a large man with no patience for theatrics, simply shook his head and pointed to the driveway. Eviction day. I stepped out of my car and crossed the street. The sound of my heels on the asphalt was the only rhythm in the chaotic morning. As I approached the driveway, I saw my mother standing in the foyer, clutching a porcelain vase to her chest as if it contained the last of her dignity. When she saw me, her eyes lit up, not with love, but with calculation. "Jasmine," she cried out, pushing past the sheriff to run down the steps. "Thank God you are here. Tell these people who we are. Tell them this is a mistake. Darius can stop this, right? He owns the note. Call him. Tell him to call off his dogs." I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at her. She looked frantic, her makeup smeared, stripped of the armor of her wealth. "Darius did not send dogs, Mother," I said calmly. "He sent the law. You had 30 days to vacate. You chose to ignore the notices. Now, the time is up." My father stumbled down the steps to join us, clutching my arm. "You cannot let them do this, Jasmine," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "This is our home. We built this life. You grew up here. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I looked past him at the sprawling brick mansion. I looked at the window of my old bedroom, the one they had tried to erase. "It means a lot to me," I said. "It means cold silences. It means conditional love. It means being told I wasn't good enough." A black sedan pulled into the driveway behind the sheriff's cruiser. A man in a sharp suit stepped out carrying a briefcase. It was Mr. Sterling, the attorney handling the asset transfer. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance?" Mr. Sterling said, approaching us with professional indifference. "The property has been officially transferred. The new owner is taking possession effective immediately. You need to remove your personal effects. Anything left behind after noon will be considered abandoned property." "The new owner?" my mother gasped, looking at the lawyer. "Who is it? Who bought it? We can talk to them. We can work out a lease. We can pay rent once the lawsuit with Chad is settled." Mr. Sterling adjusted his glasses and looked at me. "You are speaking to the owner, Mrs. Vance," he said. My parents froze. They looked at me, their mouths hanging open. The realization hit them slowly, like a wave of ice water. "You," my mother whispered. "You bought the house." I nodded slowly. "I paid the bank this morning. The deed is in my name, not Darius's, mine." A look of immense relief washed over my mother's face. She actually smiled. She let out a hysterical little laugh and reached for me again. "Oh, thank goodness," she breathed. It is you. It is just a formality then. You bought it to save it for us. I knew it. I knew you wouldn't let your parents be thrown out on the street. You are a good girl, Jasmine. We can stay in the guest wing while we get back on our feet. Or we can keep the master suite and you and Darius can move in. It is big enough for all of us. She was already planning the furniture arrangement. She was already moving back in. The delusion was impenetrable. I took a step back, breaking her contact. "No, Mother," I said. She stopped, blinking. "No? What do you mean, no?" "I mean you are not staying here," I said, my voice steady and hard as granite. "You are not living in the guest wing. You are not living in the basement. You are leaving. Today. Right now." But why?" my father stammered. "Why would you buy the house if not to keep the family together?" "Because I am repurposing it," I said. I turned to look at the house again. "I spent 18 years in this house feeling like I didn't belong," I told them. "I felt like an orphan in a house full of people. So, I decided to make it a place where people who actually need a home can find one." I turned back to them. "I am donating the property to the city of Chicago," I explained. "By next month, this will be the Vance Center for Youth. It will be a transitional home for foster children who have aged out of the system. It will be a place filled with kids who have nobody, kids who know what it is like to be judged and discarded. And unlike me, they will find warmth here. They will find a foundation." My mother looked horrified. "You are turning our estate into a shelter." "I am turning it into a home," I corrected. "Something it never was when you owned it." My father's face reddened. "You cannot do this to us, Jasmine. Think about what people will say. The neighbors, our friends. If they see us being kicked out by our own daughter, we will be pariahs. Our reputation will be destroyed." "Your reputation was destroyed the moment you trusted a con artist over your own conscience," I snapped. "And frankly, I do not care what the neighbors think. But since you are so worried about appearances, I suggest you start packing your car before the news vans show up." My mother began to sob, a loud, wailing sound that made the sheriff look over uncomfortably. "Where will we go?" she cried. "We have nowhere. The bank took the accounts. Chad took the retirement. We are destitute." "Are you really going to let your parents sleep under a bridge? Is that the kind of monster you are?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a small envelope. I held it out to my father. "I am not a monster," I said. "I am a realist." My father took the envelope with shaking hands. He opened it. Inside was a single key and a folded piece of paper. "That is a lease for a 2-bedroom apartment in Cicero," I said. "Cicero?" my mother shrieked. That is the slums!" "It is 40 minutes from the city. It is a respectable working-class neighborhood," I said. "It has a bus stop right in front, which is good because you will need it." I pointed to the paper. "I have paid the rent for 3 months," I continued. "The utilities are in your name. You have 90 days of free housing. That is more than you gave me when you cut me off. After 3 months, you are on your own." "But how will we pay?" my father asked, looking at the key as if it were a poisonous snake. "We have no income." "Then I suggest you get jobs," I said. "Jobs," my mother whispered. "I am 60 years old, Jasmine. I have never worked a day in my life. I am a socialite." Then you have excellent people skills, I said. I hear Walmart is hiring greeters. And Dad, I know the local hospital is looking for orderlies. It is not surgery, but at least you will be near a scalpel. They stared at me with pure hatred. The mask of family had finally slipped completely, revealing the rot underneath. I hate you, my mother hissed. I wish I had never given birth to you. I smiled, and for the first time, it didn't hurt. I know, I said softly. And that is exactly why I am doing this. Because for the first time, I am loving myself enough to stop trying to buy your love. I turned to the sheriff. Officer, you can proceed. The sheriff nodded and signaled his men. They began to carry boxes out to the curb. My parents scrambled to grab what they could, stuffing clothes into garbage bags, grabbing photo albums, looking small and pathetic against the backdrop of the grand house they used to rule. I watched as the neighbors began to emerge. Mrs. Gable from next door stood at her window, sipping coffee. The Peterson family across the street came out to their porch. They weren't coming to help. They were watching. They were witnessing the fall of the house of Vance. My father dragged a suitcase down the driveway, the wheels clattering loudly. My mother followed, clutching her fur coat, her head down, refusing to look at anyone. They didn't have a luxury sedan waiting. They had called a taxi, an old yellow cab that was currently idling at the curb, its exhaust sputtering gray smoke. As the taxi driver popped the trunk and began to load their meager belongings, my mother looked back at me one last time. She looked at the house, then at me, standing tall in my custom dress, the deed to her legacy in my purse. You will regret this, she spat. I don't think I will, I said. She got into the cab. My father followed, slamming the door. I watched the taxi pull away, merging into the traffic, disappearing down the street that they had once thought they owned. I stood there for a long time, listening to the wind rustle the trees. The house behind me was empty now. It was silent. The ghosts of my childhood were being packed into boxes and hauled away. I turned to look at the structure. It was just brick and mortar. It wasn't a monster. It was just a building that had held the wrong people for too long. I walked up the steps, past the sheriff who tipped his hat to me. I put my hand on the front door. It was cold, but it felt solid. Tomorrow the contractors would come. We would rip out the marble floors. We would paint over the beige walls with bright, happy colors. We would fill the rooms with bunk beds and toys and books. We would fill the silence with the noise of children who were learning that they mattered. I took a deep breath of the crisp air. It smelled of winter, but underneath, I could smell the faint promise of spring. My parents were gone. The debt was paid. The house was mine. And as I turned to walk back to my car, leaving the keys with the property manager, I realized that for the first time in 35 years, I was finally, truly home. The fall of the House of Vance did not happen in a vacuum. While my parents were exiled to their 2-bedroom apartment in Cicero, struggling to figure out how to operate a laundromat washing machine, my sister Ebony was facing a different kind of reckoning. For years, Ebony had existed as a digital entity. She was a collection of pixels, filters, and hashtags. Her entire self-worth was measured in likes and the envy of strangers. But when the cease and desist order from Aquaflow shut down her social media channels and the seizure of Chad's assets took away her wardrobe, Ebony evaporated. The girl who refused to wear anything that did not have a logo was suddenly forced to exist in the real world. And the real world, she quickly discovered, does not care about your follower count. I did not have to guess what her life was like. I had eyes everywhere. Chicago is a big city, but the circle of service workers is tight, and word travels fast. I knew exactly where Ebony had landed. She was working the lunch shift at a Burger King on the South Side. It was a cruel twist of irony that the girl who once mocked me for having dirt under my fingernails now spent her days covered in a thin film of grease that no amount of scrubbing could remove. She wore a polyester uniform that was 2 sizes too big, a visor that flattened her hair, and slip-resistant black shoes that were ugly but necessary. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the eviction, I parked my car across the street from the restaurant. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to see if the rumors were true. I watched through the window as Ebony wiped down tables. She moved slowly, her shoulders slumped. A group of teenage girls walked in, loud and laughing, holding their phones up to record TikTok videos. They looked exactly like Ebony used to look. They were wearing fast fashion, their makeup perfect, their attitude entitled. One of the girls snapped her fingers at Ebony. "Hey, you missed a spot," the girl said, pointing to a ketchup stain on the table. "And hurry up, we need to take a picture." I watched my sister. The old Ebony would have flipped the table. The old Ebony would have laughed in their faces and told them her shoes cost more than their lives. But this, Ebony simply nodded. "I am sorry," she said, her voice quiet. "I will get it right away." She scrubbed the spot. The girl snickered, whispering something about her hair, which was frizzy and pulled back in a messy bun. Ebony didn't look up. She finished cleaning, took their tray of trash, and walked back to the kitchen, her head bowed low. It was painful to watch. It was the total deconstruction of an ego. But I knew, deep down, that it was the only way she would ever learn. You cannot build character when you are standing on a pedestal. You have to be on the ground. 2 days later, my receptionist buzzed me. "Jasmine," she said softly, "your sister is here. She says she doesn't have an appointment, and she knows she isn't allowed up. She said she just wants to leave a letter." I looked at the pile of work on my desk. I looked at the picture of Darius and me on our wedding day. "Send her up," I said. When Ebony walked into my office, she looked different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. She was wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her hands were red and chapped from the industrial sanitizers used at the restaurant. She stood by the door, afraid to step onto the plush carpet. "Hi, Jasmine," she said, her voice cracking. "Hello, Ebony," I said, gesturing to the chair. "Sit down." She sat on the edge of the seat, twisting her hands in her lap. She looked around the office, at the view of the city, at the awards on the shelf. "I am sorry," she said. It wasn't the fake apology she had given in the lobby 3 weeks ago. It wasn't followed by a request for a job or money. It was just a statement. "I am sorry for everything," she continued, tears beginning to spill down her cheeks. "I am sorry for how I treated you. I am sorry for the things I said about Darius. I am sorry I didn't defend you when Mom and Dad were cutting you out. I was so jealous, Jasmine." "Jealous?" I asked. "You were the golden child, Ebony. You had everything." "No," she shook her head. "I had things. You had a self. You always knew who you were. You liked gardening. You liked design. You had a passion. I just had mirrors. I just had people looking at me. And when the money was gone and the likes stopped, I realized I am empty. I am just a shell. She looked down at her hands. I served a girl yesterday who reminded me of me, she whispered. She was so mean. She treated me like I was invisible, and I realized that is what I did to you for 30 years. I made you feel invisible because it made me feel big, and I am so ashamed. She covered her face with her hands and began to sob. It was a raw, ugly cry. It was the sound of a child realizing they are alone in the dark. I let her cry. I handed her a tissue box and waited. I didn't rush to hug her. I didn't tell her it was okay, because it wasn't okay yet. Apologies are just words. Change is action. When she finally quieted down, wiping her face, she looked at me with red, swollen eyes. I didn't come here to ask for money, she said, sniffing. I know I don't deserve it, and I am not asking you to save me. I wanted you to know that I know. I know I was a monster. I looked at her. I saw the sister I used to play with before our parents pitted us against each other. I saw the potential that had been buried under layers of vanity. So, what is the plan, Ebony? I asked. Are you going to work at Burger King forever? I don't know, she admitted. It pays the rent for the room I am renting. It keeps me fed. I guess that is my life now. It doesn't have to be, I said. I opened my desk drawer. Inside was a heavy textbook I had bought online the day I saw her cleaning tables. I pulled it out and slid it across the desk toward her. It wasn't a check. It wasn't a job offer. It was a book titled The Complete Guide to Graphic Design and Digital Branding. Ebony looked at the book, then at me, confused. What is this? She asked. You have an eye, Ebony, I said. You always did. You knew how to curate an image. You knew angles, lighting, color palettes. You spent 10 years building a brand, even if it was a fake one. That is a skill. But you used it for vanity. I tapped the cover of the book. This is the technical side, I explained. This is the hard work. This is learning the software, the theory, the typography. It is not taking selfies. It is creating value for clients. I leaned forward. I am not going to give you money, I said firmly. I am not going to give you a job at Aquaflow. Not yet, because you haven't earned it. But if you take this book and you study it and you enroll in the community college courses on design, I will pay for the tuition, direct to the school, not a penny to you. Ebony stared at the book. You would do that? She whispered. After everything? I am not doing it for you, I said. I am doing it because the world has enough influencers. We need more creators. I stood up. Study, learn the trade, get your certification, and when you have a portfolio that isn't just pictures of your face, bring it to me. If it is good, I will interview you, like any other candidate. Ebony stood up. She reached out and touched the book as if it were a holy relic. She picked it up. It was heavy. It was a burden, but it was also a lifeline. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw a spark of genuine gratitude in her eyes. Thank you, she said. I won't let you down. Don't promise me, I said. Show me. Now go. You don't want to be late for your shift. She nodded, clutching the book to her chest. She turned and walked to the door. She looked smaller than she used to, less shiny, but she looked more real. When she reached the door, she turned back. "Jasmine," she said, "the fries, they really burn your hands, don't they?" "Yes," I smiled. "They do. But the burns heal and the calluses make you stronger." She managed a weak smile, then walked out. I watched the door close. I didn't know if she would make it. I didn't know if she had the discipline to sit in a classroom after years of sitting in limousines. But as I turned back to the window, watching the city below, I felt a sense of peace. I hadn't saved her. I had given her a ladder. Whether she chose to climb it or stay in the pit was entirely up to her. And that, I realized, was the only true kindness I could offer. The flashbulbs on the red carpet were blinding, but for the first time in my life, I did not feel the need to shield my eyes. I walked through the wall of light with my head held high, the golden silk of my gown trailing behind me like liquid fire. Beside me, Darius moved with his signature quiet power, his hand resting on the small of my back, a constant reminder that I was anchored. We were attending the National Entrepreneur of the Year Gala, the most prestigious event in the city, held at the historic Field Museum. Tonight was not about my family name. It was not about social standing or who my parents knew. Tonight was about the work. As we moved down the carpet, reporters called out our names. They were not asking about the scandal with Chad, which had finally faded from the headlines after his sentencing. They were not asking about the foreclosure of the Vance estate. They were asking about the groundbreaking ceremony for the new community center. They were asking about the award I was nominated for. "Jasmine, over here," a reporter from the Tribune shouted. "Is it true you designed the new city park using entirely recycled water systems?" "It is," I smiled, stopping for a photo. "We believe that beauty and sustainability should go hand in hand." "You look stunning, Jasmine," another reporter called out. "Who are you wearing?" I looked at my dress. It was bold, unapologetic, and vibrant. "I am wearing confidence," I said, winking at the camera, "and a little bit of vintage Dior." We made our way inside the Great Hall. The room was transformed into a wonderland of crystal and light. The city's elite were there, the real elite, the people who built things, created jobs, and shaped the skyline. And among them, I felt a sense of belonging I had never found in the stuffy country clubs of my youth. When we reached our table, right in the front row, I saw the program. My name was listed under the finalists for Architect of the Year. My heart did a little flutter, not of nerves, but of anticipation. Darius leaned over and kissed my cheek. "You already won," he whispered, "whether they call your name or not. You built a life from the rubble, Jazz. That is the greatest architecture of all." I squeezed his hand under the table. I knew he was right. But when the presenter took the stage an hour later, the room went silent, and I found myself holding my breath. "The winner," the presenter announced, opening the heavy envelope, "for her visionary work in urban renewal and sustainable landscape design is Jasmine Vance." The applause was thunderous. It washed over me like a warm wave. I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady. Darius stood with me, beaming with pride as he helped me navigate the hem of my dress. I walked up the stairs to the stage. The spotlight hit me, warm and bright. I took the heavy crystal trophy in my hands. It felt cool and solid. I looked out at the sea of faces. I adjusted the microphone. I had prepared a speech, but looking out at the crowd, The words on the card felt too formal. I put the card away. "Thank you," I began, my voice clear and strong. Growing up, I was taught that value came from appearance. I was taught that if something was cracked or dirty or broken, you threw it away. You hid it. You pretended it did not exist. I paused, thinking of the dusty overalls, the peeling paint of our mansion, the grease on Ebony's hands. But I learned that is not how you build a legacy, I continued. Architecture is not about covering up flaws. It is about understanding the land. It is about digging deep into the dirt, finding the bedrock, and building something that can withstand the storm. You cannot have a flower without the soil. You cannot have a structure without a foundation. I looked down at Darius in the front row. I share this award with my husband, Darius. When we met, my family called him a laborer. They judged him by the dust on his boots. But he taught me that the most important work is the work you do when no one is watching. He taught me that you do not find worth in a bank account. You find it in the integrity of your own hands. I lifted the trophy slightly. To everyone who has ever been told they are not enough, or that their dreams are too dirty, or that they do not belong at the table. Build your own table, lay your own foundation, and never be afraid to get your hands dirty. Thank you. The room erupted again. As I walked off stage, clutching the award, I felt a sense of completion. The little girl who just wanted her parents to look at her was gone. The woman who stood in her place needed no one to look at her because she finally saw herself. The rest of the night was a blur of congratulations and champagne. But the real moment of clarity came when we left. It was past midnight when we walked out the back exit of the museum to avoid the crush of paparazzi at the front. The air was crisp and cold, signaling the end of winter. Our car was waiting at the curb, the engine idling softly. There was a small crowd of onlookers gathered behind the metal barricades, people hoping to catch a glimpse of the city's movers and shakers. As Darius opened the car door for me, movement caught my eye. Standing near the end of the barricade, away from the excited fans, were two figures. They were huddled together against the cold. I froze. It was them. My parents. They looked older, so much older than they had just a few months ago. My father was wearing a coat that looked too thin for the weather, the collar frayed. He was not wearing a hat, and his gray hair was wind-blown and thinning. My mother was wearing a wool coat that I recognized from years ago, but it was pilled and faded. She was clutching a plastic grocery bag. They weren't there to protest. They weren't there to cause a scene. They were just watching. They had likely seen the news coverage. They knew I was here, and they had come, standing in the cold for hours, just to see me. My mother saw me looking. Her eyes widened. She took a step forward, pressing against the metal railing. She raised her hand, a small, tentative wave. Her lips moved. I couldn't hear her over the wind and the distance, but I knew the shape of the word. Jasmine. It was a plea. It was a request for acknowledgement. It was a silent beg for a return to the warmth they had cast me out of. Darius saw them too. He stiffened, his body instantly shifting into a protective stance, blocking me slightly. He looked at me, a question in his eyes. Do you want me to handle this? Do you want to go over there? I looked at them. I looked at the people who had given me life and then tried to drain the life out of me. I looked at the woman who told me I was a disgrace. I looked at the man who tried to buy my dignity for a check. I felt for the anger. I searched my heart for the rage that had fueled me for so long, but it was gone. There was no fire left. There was only a quiet, distant pity. They were just two old people standing in the cold, watching a life they could have been part of, but chose to destroy. They were strangers with familiar faces. I didn't look away. I didn't sneer. I didn't yell. I looked my mother directly in the eyes. I held her gaze for 3 long seconds, and then I nodded. It was a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation. It was a closing of the book. It was me saying, I see you. I survived you. And I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. My mother's hand dropped. She understood. She saw the finality in my eyes. She slumped against the barricade, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. I turned my back. I gripped the handle of the car door. I gathered my golden skirt, and I stepped into the vehicle, leaving the cold street behind. Darius slid in next to me, and the door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, shutting out the world. "Are you okay?" he asked, taking my hand. I looked at him. I looked at the trophy resting on the seat between us. "I am better than okay," I said. "I am free." The car pulled away, merging into the stream of taillights heading toward the future. My parents had spent their lives worshiping false idols. They worshipped money. They worshipped status. They worshipped the opinion of strangers. And in the end, those idols had devoured them. I looked out the window at the passing city lights. I thought about the text I had received from Ebony earlier that day. It was a picture of her first graphic design project, a logo for a local bakery. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She was climbing. She was learning. She might make it. As for my parents, they were exactly where they chose to be, on the outside, looking in. I leaned my head on Darius's shoulder. "You know," I said softly, "they used to make fun of you. They used to call you a plumber like it was the worst thing in the world." Darius chuckled, the sound vibrating through his chest. "I know," he said. "It bothered you more than it bothered me." I smiled, closing my eyes. "They were right, though," I whispered. Darius looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you are a plumber," I said, squeezing his hand. "You found the leak in my life. You found the toxic sludge that was poisoning everything. And you didn't just patch it up. You flushed it out. You cleared the pipes. You fixed the pressure." I opened my eyes and looked at him, the man who had saved me not with his money, but with his truth. They called my husband a plumber, and thank God they were right, because he fixed my life by flushing the most toxic waste out of it, even when that waste was my own family. And now, finally, the water runs clear. If you have ever had to cut ties to save your soul, or if you are still looking for the strength to walk away from people who do not value you, hit that subscribe button, share your story in the comments. Let us build a community that stands on solid ground. Because you are the architect of your own life, and no one, absolutely no one, gets to tell you that you don't belong in your own home. Thanks for watching. And remember, the best revenge is not destroying them. It is building yourself.